The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Copper Ridge when Evangeline Angel McCready rode into town on a paint mare that had seen better days. Her leather boots were worn thin at the heels, her split riding skirt was patched in 3 places, and the brim of her hat was so frayed it barely cast shade over her green eyes. But those eyes held a fire that made even the hardest men in town look twice, and the Colt 45 on her hip suggested she knew how to use it. Angel had been riding hard for 3 days, living on jerky and creek water, following rumors and whispers that had led her to this god-forsaken corner of Arizona territory. Copper Ridge was a company town, owned lock, stock, and barrel by Jeremiah Blackwood, whose Double B Ranch stretched across 50,000 acres of prime grazing land. Blackwood was a man who took what he wanted and crushed anyone foolish enough to stand in his way. She hitched her mare outside the Dusty Rose Saloon and pushed through the batwing doors. The conversation died the moment she entered. Piano music stuttered to a halt. Even the flies seemed to stop buzzing. Angel had grown accustomed to such receptions. A woman traveling alone in these parts was unusual enough. A woman with iron in her eyes and death on her hip was downright unsettling. The bartender, a thin man with nervous hands, wiped the same glass 3 times before finding his voice.
"What can I get you, miss?" "Information," Angel said, her voice carrying the soft drawl of East Texas. "And whiskey. The good stuff, not the rot gut you serve the cowhands." She laid a silver dollar on the scarred wooden bar, more money than most folks in Copper Ridge saw in a week. The bartender's eyes widened. He reached under the counter and produced a bottle of genuine Kentucky bourbon. "What kind of information might you be seeking?" he asked, pouring 2 fingers into a clean glass. Angel sipped the whiskey, savoring the burn. Around the room, conversation slowly resumed, but she could feel every eye watching her reflection in the mirror behind the bar. "I'm looking for a man named Tommy Brennan," she said quietly. "Irish boy, about 22, with a scar on his left hand from a branding iron. He worked cattle drives up from Texas." The bartender's hand trembled slightly as he set down the bottle. "Miss, I think you might want to finish your drink and ride on. Some names ain't safe to speak in this town. I'm not leaving without answers." Before the bartender could respond, the saloon doors exploded inward. 3 men strode inside, their spurs jangling against the wooden floor. The largest wore a black vest with silver conchos and a tin star pinned to his chest. Sheriff Buck Morrison was Blackwood's enforcer, a man who dispensed the rancher's version of justice with brutal efficiency. "Well, well," Morrison drawled, his hand resting casually on his gun butt.
"Looks like we got ourselves a visitor. And here I thought all the decent folks in the territory knew better than to come asking questions about dead men." Angel turned slowly, her whiskey glass still in her left hand. "Dead men tell the most interesting stories, Sheriff, especially when they die under mysterious circumstances." Morrison's companions spread out, flanking him. Angel recognized the type. Hired guns who'd kill a man for the price of a meal and sleep soundly afterward. "Tommy Brennan was a rustler and a thief," Morrison said. "He got what rustlers get in these parts, a short rope and a tall tree." "Funny thing about that," Angel replied, setting down her glass with deliberate care. "Tommy never stole so much as a biscuit in his life. He was also my brother." The temperature in the saloon seemed to drop 10 degrees. Morrison's eyes narrowed as he reassessed the woman before him. "Your brother, you say? Then I reckon you know he was caught red-handed with 20 head of Double B cattle. I know Tommy was working an honest job, trying to save enough money to bring our sister west from Louisiana. Angel's voice remained steady, but her right hand had shifted closer to her holster. "I also know Jeremiah Blackwood has a habit of accusing inconvenient people of rustling when they get in his way." One of Morrison's men, a weasel-faced gunslinger with tobacco-stained teeth, let out a harsh laugh. "You hear that, Buck? This little lady thinks she can come into our town and make accusations against Mr. Blackwood." "I heard," Morrison said. "Miss McCready, is it? I suggest you climb back on that sorry excuse for a horse and ride out of here before something unfortunate happens to you, too." Angel smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Sheriff, I appreciate the concern, but I've come too far to turn back now. You see, before Tommy died, he managed to send me a letter. Very interesting reading." Morrison's hand tightened on his gun. "What letter?" "The one where he told me about the gold mine Blackwood's been hiding in the North Hills. The one where he explained how Blackwood's been using rustling charges to run off legitimate prospectors who got too close to his secret diggings." The silence that followed was so complete, Angel could hear her own heartbeat. Morrison's face had gone pale beneath his weathered tan. "You're lying," he said. "Am I?" Angel reached into her vest pocket with 2 fingers, moving slowly to avoid spooking the jumpy gunman. She withdrew a folded piece of paper. Tommy was always good with details. Names, dates, locations, even a rough map of where the mine entrance is hidden. Morrison lunged forward, but Angel was ready. Her left hand flipped the whiskey into his eyes while her right drew steel. The Colt cleared leather faster than thought, its barrel centering on Morrison's chest. "I wouldn't," she said calmly as the sheriff clawed at his burning eyes. The 2 gunmen hesitated, their hands halfway to their weapons. Angel's reputation might be unknown to them, but her speed was now apparent. "Here's how this is going to work," Angel continued. "You're going to back away slowly and walk out that door. Then you're going to tell Jeremiah Blackwood that Angel McCready wants to have a conversation with him. Tomorrow at noon, in front of the church." "He'll never agree to that," Morrison snarled, still blinking away tears. "Oh, I think he will." Angel's smile turned predatory. "Especially when you tell him I have something that belongs to him. Something he's been looking for since the day my brother died." She held up the letter, letting them all see it clearly. Tommy hid more than just information in this letter. He hid something Blackwood needs very badly. Morrison straightened, his eyes clearing. "What are you talking about?" "The deed to the mineral rights on the north section," Angel said. "The deed that proves Blackwood's been mining on government land without authorization. The deed that could bring federal marshals down on him faster than a summer storm." It was a bluff, but a calculated one. Angel had studied Jeremiah Blackwood for months, learning his strengths and weaknesses. The man was powerful, but his power was built on a foundation of secrets and intimidation. Men like Blackwood always had something to hide. Morrison's reaction told her she'd guessed correctly. His face went from pale to gray, and his hand trembled as he holstered his still-drawn pistol. "You don't know what you're messing with, lady," he whispered. "I know exactly what I'm messing with, Sheriff. The question is, does Blackwood have enough backbone to face me in the open, or is he the kind of coward who only fights through hired guns and corrupt lawmen?" The challenge hung in the air like gun smoke. Angel kept her weapon steady, her green eyes never leaving Morrison's face. Around them, the saloon had emptied as patrons fled through the back door, unwilling to be caught in the crossfire when bullets started flying. Finally, Morrison nodded to his men. "Let's go," he muttered. As they reached the door, he turned back. "Miss McCready, you just signed your own death warrant. Blackwood don't negotiate with nobody." "We'll see about that," Angel replied. After they left, the bartender emerged from behind an overturned table, his face white as fresh snow. "Lady, you must be plumb loco. Nobody threatens Jeremiah Blackwood and lives to tell about it." Angel holstered her Colt and retrieved her whiskey glass, draining the contents in one swallow. "Maybe not," she said, "but Tommy was my little brother, and some debts can only be paid in blood." She left a second silver dollar on the bar and walked outside, where her paint mare waited patiently in the afternoon heat. As she untied the reins, Angel noticed the curtains twitching in windows up and down the street. Word would spread fast in a town this size. By sunset, every soul in Copper Ridge would know that someone had finally stood up to Jeremiah Blackwood. Angel mounted her horse and rode slowly toward the edge of town, her back straight and her head held high. She had less than 24 hours to prepare for what might be the last conversation of her life. But as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Angel McCready allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The game had begun, and for the first time since Tommy's death, she held some of the cards. Angel spent the night camped in a grove of cottonwoods 2 miles north of town, her fire kept small and her weapons within easy reach. She'd learned long ago that survival on the frontier required constant vigilance, especially when you just declared war on the most powerful man in the territory. As dawn broke across the desert, she studied the letter Tommy had sent her one final time. Her brother's familiar handwriting brought a familiar ache to her chest, but she forced herself to focus on the details he'd recorded. Tommy had been methodical in his observations, noting guard rotations at the Double B Ranch, the comings and goings of mysterious wagons in the night, and, most importantly, the location of what he called Blackwood's secret shame. The mine wasn't marked on any territorial survey, but Tommy had stumbled across it while tracking strays in the North Hills. He'd watched from hiding as heavily armed men moved equipment and supplies into what appeared to be a natural cave entrance. More telling, he'd recognized several faces among the workers, men who were supposed to be serving time in the territorial prison for robbery and murder. Angel folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into her vest. Tommy's information was valuable, but it wasn't the deed she'd claimed to possess. That had been a desperate bluff, designed to force Blackwood into the open. Now she had to make good on her promise or face the consequences of a very angry and very dangerous man. She broke camp as the sun crested the mountains, riding back toward Copper Ridge with the measured pace of someone who owned the world. In truth, her heart was hammering against her ribs, but Angel had learned to hide her fears behind a mask of cold confidence. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford, not with Tommy's killer still drawing breath. The town was already stirring when she arrived. Shopkeepers swept their boardwalks with unusual vigor, and conversations died as she passed. Angel nodded politely to the few brave souls who met her eyes, playing the role of a woman without a care in the world. She tied her mare to the hitching post in front of Murphy's General Store and pushed through the door. The proprietor, a round Irish man with kind eyes, looked up from his ledger with obvious nervousness. "Morning, miss," he said carefully. "What can I do for you?" "I need supplies," Angel replied. "Ammunition, bacon, coffee, and hardtack. Enough for a week on the trail." Murphy's hands shook slightly as he gathered the requested items. "Planning to leave soon?" he asked hopefully. "That depends on how my meeting goes today." The shopkeeper paused in his gathering. "Miss, I don't know what business you got with Mr. Blackwood, but folks around here learned long ago not to cross him. He's got more hired guns than the territorial government, and he ain't particular about how he solves his problems." Angel counted out coins for her purchases. "Mr. Murphy, did you know my brother Tommy Brennan?" The man's expression softened. "Aye, I did. Good lad, that one. Honest as the day is long."
What happened to him was a crime, but speaking up against it would be another kind of crime. The kind that gets a man's store burned down and his family run out of town. I'm not asking you to speak up, Angel said gently. I'm just asking you to remember what kind of man my brother was when you hear the lies they told about him. Murphy nodded, tears threatening at the corners of his eyes. Tommy Brennan never stole nothing from nobody, but truth and justice ain't the same thing in Copper Ridge. Angel gathered her supplies and headed for the door. Maybe not, she said.
But sometimes a person has to try anyway. The church bells were chiming 11:30 when Angel positioned herself in front of the small whitewashed building at the center of town. She'd chosen the location deliberately. Even Jeremiah Blackwood would think twice about starting a gunfight on consecrated ground with half the town watching. She didn't have to wait long. At 5 minutes before noon, a procession rode down Main Street that would have impressed a cavalry regiment. Jeremiah Blackwood led the way on a magnificent black stallion, his silver-trimmed saddle gleaming in the desert sun. He was a man in his 50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with steel-gray hair and eyes the color of winter ice. Behind him rode Sheriff Morrison and a dozen of the hardest-looking men Angel had ever seen. Blackwood dismounted with fluid grace and approached her with the confident stride of a man accustomed to having the world bend to his will. He stopped 10 feet away, his hands resting casually on his gun belt. "Miss McCready," he said, in a voice like aged whiskey and honeyed poison. "I understand you wanted to speak with me." "Mr. Blackwood." Angel touched the brim of her hat in mock courtesy. "Thank you for accepting my invitation. I don't recall accepting anything. I came here to put an end to some very dangerous rumors that seem to be spreading through my town." "Your town?" Angel raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't aware private citizens could own entire municipalities." "Perhaps you could show me the deed?" Blackwood's smile was colder than a grave in winter. "Miss McCready, you seem to be laboring under several misapprehensions. First, that you're in any position to make demands. Second, that threats against me carry any weight whatsoever. And third, that you'll be leaving Copper Ridge alive." "Interesting threats, Mr. Blackwood, especially considering we're having this conversation in front of witnesses." Angel gestured to the crowd that had gathered at a safe distance. Half the town was watching from windows and doorways, drawn by morbid curiosity and the hope of witnessing something extraordinary. "Witnesses can be very forgetful," Blackwood replied, "especially when their livelihoods depend on their discretion." Angel reached into her vest and withdrew Tommy's letter, unfolding it slowly. "Perhaps, but some things are harder to forget than others, like the contents of this letter, which I've already shared with certain interested parties." For the first time, Blackwood's composure cracked slightly, his eyes fixed on the paper in her hands with laser intensity. "What letter?" he asked. "The one my brother sent me before he died. The one detailing your illegal mining operation in the North Hills. The one that mentions your use of escaped convicts as workers and your systematic murder of anyone who got too close to your secret." Blackwood's hand inched toward his gun. "Your fishing girl." "My brother was a rustler who got what rustlers deserve." "My brother was an honest cowboy who discovered something you desperately wanted to keep hidden." Angel's voice carried clearly across the street, ensuring every word reached the watching crowd. "He found your gold mine, Mr. Blackwood, the one you've been working without proper claims or federal permits." The crowd stirred at this revelation. Even in a company town, people understood the implications of such accusations. If true, it would mean federal marshals, investigations, and the possible end of Blackwood's stranglehold on the territory. "Prove it," Blackwood snarled. Angel smiled. "I don't have to prove anything, Mr. Blackwood. I just have to plant enough doubt to bring unwanted attention to your operation. You see, I sent copies of Tommy's letter to the territorial governor, the federal marshal in Phoenix, and a very persistent newspaper reporter in Tucson. They should be receiving them any day now." It was another calculated bluff, but Angel delivered it with absolute conviction. Blackwood's face went through several shades of color before settling on a dangerous shade of red. "You're lying," he said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Am I?" Angel refolded the letter and tucked it away. "There's only one way to find out, isn't there? But I suppose you could always kill me right here in front of God and half the territory. That would certainly convince everyone of your innocence."
The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Blackwood's men had their hands on their weapons, waiting for the word to turn the church grounds into a killing field. Angel stood perfectly still, her right hand hovering near her Colt, knowing she was outnumbered 12-1. Then, unexpectedly, Blackwood laughed. "Miss McCready, you've got more sand than most men I know. I almost admire your tenacity." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. "But admiration won't save you. You've made a fatal mistake by coming here and threatening me publicly. Now I can't let you leave, even if I wanted to." Angel met his stare without flinching. "Then I guess we're at an impasse, Mr. Blackwood, because I'm not backing down, and you can't kill me without proving everything Tommy wrote was true." Blackwood's smile was the most frightening thing Angel had ever seen. "Oh, my dear girl, you underestimate my creativity. There are so many ways a person can die in the desert. Accidents happen all the time to foolish travelers who venture into dangerous territory. Is that a threat? It's a promise. You have until sunrise tomorrow to leave my territory. After that, I won't be responsible for what happens to you." He turned and walked back to his horse, his men following into formation around him. As he mounted, Blackwood called back over his shoulder, "Miss McCready, you should know that your brother died hard. He kept asking for his sister right up until the rope stopped his breathing. I thought you might find that comforting." Angel's hand moved to her gun, but Blackwood was already spurring his horse away, surrounded by his army of killers. The crowd began to disperse, whispering among themselves about what they'd witnessed. As the dust settled, Angel realized she'd won the first round, but lost the war. Blackwood couldn't kill her publicly now, but he'd made it clear that her life expectancy could be measured in hours rather than days. She had until sunrise to figure out how to bring down the most powerful man in the territory, or she'd be joining Tommy in whatever comes after this life. The odds couldn't have been worse, but as Angel untied her mare and prepared for what might be her final night on Earth, she found herself looking forward to the challenge. After all, she'd come this far, hadn't she? Angel spent the remaining daylight hours riding the perimeter of Blackwood's domain, studying the terrain with the eye of someone planning either an escape route or a final battle. The Double B Ranch sprawled across the valley floor like a feudal kingdom, complete with bunkhouses, corrals, and a main house that resembled a fortress more than a home. But it was the northern hills that held her attention. If Tommy's information was accurate, the secret mine lay somewhere in those rocky slopes, protected by armed guards and hidden from casual discovery. Angel knew she had one chance to expose Blackwood's operation before he silenced her permanently. As darkness fell, she made her way to the abandoned line shack Tommy had mentioned in his letter, a weathered structure that sat on the boundary between ranch land and government territory. The building had been empty for years, but it offered shelter and a commanding view of the approaches from town. Angel unsaddled her mare and settled in to wait. She'd sent no letters to territorial officials, of course. That had been pure fabrication designed to buy time. But she did have one ace left to play, assuming she lived long enough to use it. The attack came just after midnight. Angel heard them before she saw them, the soft creak of leather, the whispered exchange of signals, the barely audible footsteps of men trying to move silently across rocky ground. She'd been expecting this moment since her confrontation with Blackwood, and she was ready. The line shack had multiple exits, a lesson learned from years of living on the wrong side of the law. Angel slipped out the back window as the first gunman reached the front door, her Colt in one hand and Tommy's letter in the other. "She's not here!" The voice belonged to the weasel-faced gunslinger from the saloon. "Check the back!" Angel was already moving, using the darkness and her knowledge of the terrain to stay ahead of her pursuers. She'd counted at least 6 men, all armed with rifles and the kind of confidence that came from overwhelming odds. She led them on a deadly game of cat and mouse through the hills, using every trick Tommy had taught her during their outlaw days. A gunshot here to draw them off course, a deliberately left hoofprint there to suggest she'd gone in the opposite direction. But Angel wasn't running away. She was running towards something. By dawn, she'd led Blackwood's men directly to the hidden entrance of the illegal mine. The cave mouth was concealed behind a screen of brush and fallen rocks, just as Tommy had described. More importantly, it was currently unguarded, the usual sentries having been pulled away to join the hunt for one troublesome woman. Angel dismounted and crept closer, peering into the shadowy depths of the tunnel. The sound of pickaxes echoed from somewhere deep underground, along with the voices of men who should have been in prison cells. She was studying the mine entrance when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "End of the line, Miss McCready." Angel turned slowly to find Sheriff Morrison emerging from the rocks, his rifle trained on her chest. Behind him came 3 more of Blackwood's hired guns, all looking pleased with themselves for finally cornering their prey. "Sheriff," Angel said calmly, "I have to say, you boys took your time getting here." "We wanted to make sure you didn't have any more tricks up your sleeve," Morrison replied. "Now drop that gun and let's finish this." Angel let her Colt fall to the ground, but she was smiling. "You know, Sheriff, I've been wondering about something. How exactly did you plan to explain my death to those territorial officials I mentioned yesterday?" Morrison's laugh was ugly. "What officials? You were bluffing, just like we figured." "Was I?" Angel's smile widened. "Then I suppose you won't mind meeting my friend." The gunshot came from the rocks above, taking down one of Morrison's men before anyone could react. A second shot followed immediately, and another hired gun crumpled to the ground. "What the hell?" Morrison spun around, trying to locate the source of the shooting. "Sheriff Morrison!" The voice that boomed across the hillside was deep and authoritative. "This is Deputy U.S. Marshal Jake Harrison. You and your men are under arrest." Angel dove for her fallen Colt as chaos erupted around her. Morrison's surviving gunmen scattered for cover, returning fire at the unseen sniper in the rocks. Through the smoke and confusion, Angel saw a tall figure in a brown duster working his way down the slope, a Winchester rifle in his hands and a federal marshal's badge gleaming on his chest. Jake Harrison had been tracking Jeremiah Blackwood for months, following a trail of suspicious deaths and illegal mining claims across 3 territories. Angel's telegram, sent from the last town before Copper Ridge, had simply confirmed what he'd already suspected. The gunfight was brief but decisive. Morrison's men were killers, not soldiers, and they broke and ran when faced with organized resistance. Within minutes, the hillside was quiet, except for the moaning of wounded men and the echo of retreating hoofbeats. "You all right, Miss McCready?" Marshal Harrison asked, reloading his rifle with practiced efficiency. "Better than I've been in months," Angel replied. "Did you find enough evidence in that mine to hang Blackwood?" Harrison nodded toward the cave entrance, where armed federal deputies were now emerging with a string of prisoners. Enough to hang him twice. Escaped convicts, stolen federal gold, forged mining claims. Your friend, Mr. Blackwood, was running quite an operation. Angel felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she'd been carrying since the day she'd learned of Tommy's death. What happens now? "Now we ride back to town and arrest the man responsible for your brother's murder," Harrison said, "though I suspect Mr. Blackwood won't come quietly." They were right about that. When the federal marshals arrived in Copper Ridge, they found the Double B ranch house burning, and Jeremiah Blackwood nowhere to be found. The man had cut his losses and run, taking what portable wealth he could carry and abandoning his criminal empire to federal justice. But empires built on fear and intimidation don't survive the fall of their emperors. Within hours of Blackwood's flight, the truth about Tommy Brennan's murder was spreading through the territory like wildfire. Sheriff Morrison, singing like a canary to avoid the gallows, provided enough testimony to ensure that justice would be served, even in Blackwood's absence. Angel stood in the churchyard where she'd faced down Blackwood just 2 days earlier, watching smoke rise from the burning ranch house in the distance. Marshal Harrison approached, his badge catching the afternoon sunlight. "We'll find him," he said quietly. "Men like Blackwood can't hide forever." "Maybe," Angel replied, "but Tommy's been avenged, and that's what matters most." She turned to face the marshal, a question in her green eyes. "What happens to folks like me now? Seems like I'm between careers at the moment." Harrison smiled. "Well, the territorial government could use experienced deputies, especially ones with your particular skills. The pay's not much, but the work's honest." Angel considered the offer. The outlaw life had lost its appeal somewhere between Tommy's death and this morning's gunfight. Maybe it was time to try walking on the right side of the law for a change. "I accept," she said, extending her hand. "Deputy McCready has a nice ring to it." As they shook hands, Angel caught sight of her reflection in the marshal's badge. The face looking back at her was older, wiser, and marked by recent trials. But the fire in those green eyes burned as bright as ever. Tommy would have been proud. 3 months later, Angel McCready was tracking horse thieves through the mountains of New Mexico territory when she received word that Jeremiah Blackwood had been captured trying to cross into Mexico with a saddlebag full of stolen gold. He'd been returned to Arizona to face trial for murder, theft, and a dozen other charges. Angel didn't attend the execution. She had more important work to do, bringing law and order to a territory that desperately needed both. But on the day Blackwood met his maker, she raised a glass of Kentucky bourbon in a dusty saloon and whispered a toast to her little brother. "Justice served, Tommy. Rest easy now." Outside, her paint mare waited patiently in the desert sun, saddlebags loaded with supplies for the trail ahead. There were always more criminals to catch, more wrongs to right, more chances to prove that sometimes the good guys really do win in the end. Angel McCready, Deputy U.S. Marshal, climbed into the saddle and rode west toward whatever adventure awaited. Behind her, the sun was setting on one chapter of her life. Ahead, a new dawn was breaking on another. The frontier was vast, dangerous, and full of opportunities for a woman with iron in her eyes and justice in her heart. Angel McCready was exactly the kind of person the territory needed, and she aimed to prove it one case at a time. As her horse's hooves struck sparks from the rocky trail, Angel allowed herself a satisfied smile. She'd come to Copper Ridge seeking vengeance and found something better. A purpose worth living for, and a future worth fighting for.
Sometimes, the best revenge was simply outliving your enemies and building something better from the ashes they left behind.